Our next guest speaker is Erika, IT specialist from our Deloitte team, and we are coming with the presentation in a moment.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me in this session on information security and IT controls in fintech environment. Today, I will touch upon such points as general IT controls. What are those? What the Bank of Lithuania expects from you as fintech in IT sector. Shortly on EBA guidelines, key challenges and advantages of general IT controls. So what are internal IT controls? Internal IT controls are usually recognized as the same key areas throughout different information security management system frameworks, thus addressed slightly differently. We have picked big chunks of most common IT controls for this presentation. And those are access control as being the first one and the biggest one in IT controls, actually, as it covers the biggest part of other IT controls as well. So access control addresses provisioning and deprovisioning of user accesses, as well as periodical user access review, which you need to perform to make sure that your users are having the right accesses that they need to have. Following is change management controls, which focuses on segregation of duties during the change management procedures, as well as secure development cycle, which ensures that the new functionality or application is properly tested prior being deployed to the production environment, which is accessible for your clients and your employees as well. Following is data center environment controls, which addresses usually physical security and such as being controlling entry points to the data centers and ensuring that it is accessed by the people who need to have access to these premises. Following is network security controls, which is closely related to data center environment controls, simply because it creates an internal network, granting the access to the right people, being able to access the internal sensitive information. Network security also looks into whitelisting the accesses. So basically, as I mentioned before, granting the access to the data centers or internal systems only to those people who need to have access, so them being your employees. Another area of IT control is cybersecurity controls, which has increased dramatically in the previous years, and it covers antiviruses, firewalls, patch management, awareness trainings of your employees on security, you name it. As I mentioned at the very beginning, key areas are pretty much the same throughout the frameworks. Thus, there are other controls being addressed in different frameworks and depending on the industry. So you can find different or additional areas on IT controls in different frameworks. So it is up to you to choose the relevant one. So what does the Bank of Lithuania actually expect from you as a fintech? So first of all, they expect you to initiate a risk assessment to identify your key assets. So what do you need to do with this one is basically recognize and identify your key assets, identify threats and risks that are posing to those key assets, identify probability of risk happening, and severity on impact on the business processes. And then identify necessary controls to mitigate this risk, and define the residual risk and processes for future improvements to prevent such risks from happening. Following, the Bank of Lithuania expects you to integrate uh, at least one industry standard and best practice to your information management security management systems, with that being ISO 27002 or NIST or COVID or ITIL, by choosing the best one that fits your business model. And if you are an entity or a fintech that actually wants to release payment cards, you need to comply to PSI DSS, which is specifically created for payment card industry, which helps to ensure that credit card or payment card information is securely transferred and processed. As you already heard from a previous presentation by Raimundas, it is expected that you should be compliant to PSD2 and GDPR. As from technical perspective, the Bank of Lithuania expects you to be compliant to PSD2 from a perspective of strong customer authentication by providing technical solutions that assures that you are authenticating your customers. Compliance with the GDPR from a technical perspective refers to technical solutions that ensure that your employee, your client, your own, and your business data is securely managed in IT systems. And of course, the Bank of Lithuania expects you to be compliant with EBA guidelines on information and communication technologies and security risk management and reporting, which I will talk about briefly in upcoming slides. And of course, the foremost important, the Bank of Lithuania expects you to have no contradictions between your business plan, your internal controls, your internal policies and procedures, and regulations and guidelines given by the Bank of Lithuania. So basically, the Bank of Lithuania expects you to be consistent throughout your business plan and comply to the activities allowed accordingly to your license. So when talking about EBA guidelines on information and communication technologies and security risk management, it gives you a good base for a starting point in understanding and aligning your expectations to the Bank of Lithuania expectations. And EBI guidelines has identified the key areas that needs to be covered from a technical perspective or from IT perspective to ensure that the control landscape is fulfilled and your IT systems are secured. And that is what the Bank of Lithuania also refers to while looking in your control framework for IT. Here you can see actually some of the key areas identified by the EBA. The rest will follow in the following slide. There are many more areas to cover with the EBA guidelines, because these are the key chunks that you can refer to. And by reading these guidelines or reviewing this document actually will allow you to choose the right information security management system framework for your entity. So make sure that you do your homework and you read the guidelines given, as it really gives a good understanding of what is actually expected from you as a fintech and as a company to comply and ensure your information security. Okay, so moving along, by reading actually the regulations and the guidelines provided by the Bank of Lithuania or EBA will allow you to address the key challenges that the fintechs face. And we'll talk about them here. We have 6 challenges. And I just want to stress out that if you do not address one of the key challenges, at least one, you will fail in others. So to speak, if you will not identify or classify your key assets, you will fail to perform risk assessment to your key assets. You will fail to sufficiently establish sufficient monitoring controls to monitor possible fraudulent and unauthorized activities. and that would lead to a disaster or even crisis, which you do not want to have in your entity. You just want to have secure environment where you can actually control and operate in a secure manner. So make sure that you follow the EBA guidelines, follow the regulations, the requirements of the Bank of Lithuania, and you address the necessary pieces. And if you look back to Raimondo's presentation and my presentation, you could have seen risk assessment resonating in all of the, basically in most of the slides. So you need to follow it and understand that it is a big part of information security, that you need to perform risk assessments and identify your key assets. Otherwise, you might be falling in non-compliance. So once you address your key challenges, you will see the benefits of having IT controls. I have listed quite some benefits, but I want just to summarize them in key aspects, that being increased or easier compliance to the regulatory requirements, simply because you will be prepared for the requirements and then the regulator guidelines, and because you would know what your assets are and how to control them. Reduced risk and vulnerability exploits, because you would be managing your risks, and increased productivity and efficiency, which is quite important for the business, right? You want your operations to be productive and efficient. So you would be getting these as well with IT controls, simply because your core business is based on technology, and that's what general IT controls brings to you. It's not only compliance, but also productivity and efficiency. So how can we help you with general IT controls? We can help you from A to Z, so to say. We can help you with understanding of what it is required from you by the Bank of Lithuania, by other regulators. We can provide you with assistance in drafting processes, policies, and procedures. We can actually review the current state of your governance framework and provide you with gap analysis, so you would understand what is your factual situation, and you would get the recommendations to improve your frameworks, as well as we can provide you with the risk assessments and evaluation of those, as well as evaluation of your internal controls and on effectiveness of it. And we can provide you with the penetration testing and vulnerability scanning by the specialized ethical hacker unit. So I guess my key takeaway from this would be, do your homework, read the guidelines and regulations provided by the regulator. If you do not, and if you do not fully understand what is required, contact a specialist. Not necessarily me, but you can contact a specialist in the regulatory body. They will give you answers. They are willing to give you answers. You can contact us. We will be able to provide you the answers that you are looking for as well. So thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, do let me know.
Thank you, Erika, for the presentation. I also don't see any questions now popping up in our YouTube chat. I wanted to ask, there are a couple of frameworks, IT frameworks. So ITIL, COBIT, ISO 27K. Which one is better to use for a fintech company in order to align with ECB guidelines and other regulatory matters? Is it like one better pick, or what would you suggest?
I would say that all frameworks are good, but the best pick for fintech would be ISO 27000 K standards, simply because it is focused on information security management systems and information security, and it is accepted globally, and it is a wider framework. Other frameworks were specifically designed to specific business areas. So therefore, they might have some limitations. But if you want to be covered in all aspects, starting from your application security to human resources security, choose ISO 27000 standard.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Similar question as I asked Raimondas. So based on your practice, based on your experience, what are 3 usual weaknesses or points to improve in small organizations when we talk about IT controls and general IT controls and environment?
I'd say that usual suspects would be failure to deliver risk assessment, identify key assets, documentation for sure, or keeping the track of your actions performed in risk assessment, in access controls, or provisioning of accesses and deprovisioning of accesses. I guess the biggest issue is the keeping track of it. Not that they are not performing the actions they are, but usually the documentation part is lost.
Okay, thank you for the presentation.